Hi, it's Fred Driedger. After reading Letters to My Grandchildren, written by our Uncle Yash, a decision was made to create an audio version of those letters. Our Uncle Yash, also known as Jacob P. Driedger, was born in 1901 in southern Russia, or the Ukraine. He was the oldest son of my grandparents, Peter A. and Mary Driedger. Our grandparents had 7 surviving children: Jacob, the writer of these letters, Peter, Abram, Mary, Gata, Annie, and John. John, known as John P. Driedger, is my father. Jacob describes growing up on a 450-acre estate established in 1870 by my great-grandfather, Abram Driedger. While his youth was happy and carefree, that all changed with the Russian Revolution, resulting in lawlessness, theft, and even murder within the Mennonite villages. After surviving a famine and continued violence, my grandfather, Peter A. Driedger, made the decision to leave everything and emigrate to Canada. Uncle Yash was 23 years old. Much later, he passed on this story by writing Letters to My Grandchildren. The narrator is Janice Funk, my sister and niece of the writer. Some of the background music is that of the radio choir. While these letters are an important part of our history, we recognize that many other families have a similar story. We would encourage you to share them as well. And now, Letters to My Grandchildren, Part 1, by Jacob P. Driedger. Letter 1, the explanation.
We older folks like to reminisce, as there is not too much to look forward to anymore. I mean, in our earthly lives. So if I look back over the years to the time when I was born, at the beginning of this century, I cannot help but see the big changes that have taken place since then. All in a man's lifetime. Today we talk about energy crisis, pollution, overpopulation, woman's lib, strikes, etc., etc. In those early days, these were strange words and concepts. Nobody had ever heard of them. The house I was born in was a large one, was built by my grandfather Abram Driedger. It had 10 rooms, all good-sized ones. How many bedrooms? All, or any one of them, could be a bedroom, and sometimes probably were. The definitions as to what is a bedroom, or a dining room, a living room, etc., were not quite so exact as they are today. The house was warm in winter, cool in summer, comfortable to live in. But there were many things the house did not have, things that are seemingly an absolute necessity today.
Letter 2, the family home in Schoenfeld.
I shall continue on the description of my boyhood home. As already mentioned, our house had none of the innovations we have in our homes today. Firstly, there was no water on tap. Instead, all the water had to be carried in from an outside well in pails and buckets. Drinking water was kept in a separate pail, with the handle of a ladle sticking out. Everybody was drinking from this pail, dipping it out with the ladle. Not very hygienic, we would probably say today. All the slop water had to be carried back out again. So you see, carrying water in and out was a regular chore. Secondly, we had no electricity. All the gadgets that we have in our homes today, and which are all run by electricity and are doing a great deal of the housework, were absent in our house of long ago, and the work had to be done by hard manual labor. Thirdly, we had no automatic central heating, where all you do is set your thermostat to the desired heat and forget about it. Our house had 3 large ovens, rising from the floor up to the ceiling and making up part of the room dividing wall. Each oven heated 2 or 3 rooms and was constructed of glazed tile, often in a nice flowery pattern. And the fuel we used? Just imagine, it was plain, common wheat straw, of which we had a great abundance. No fuel shortage would ever be expected on this commodity. The ovens were heated twice daily, mornings and evenings. A certain amount of straw was brought into the kitchen each night. Half of it was burned in the ovens, and the other half made up into a bed for the 3 or so maids to sleep on. In the morning, the blankets and pillows would be taken down, and the straw or bed, if you wish, offered to the ovens as a sacrifice. So the girls had a new bed of sweet-smelling straw every night. And good night to you, too.
Letter 3. About the household and farmyard.
And now we shall continue with our story. Much more could be said about the house, its furnishings, its decor. Most of all the furniture was made by Mennonite craftsmen. It was of long-lasting quality, very durable, and lasted from generation to generation. There were no so-called easy chairs and sofas with rich-looking upholstery. Everything was very plain. Wooden floors were repainted at regular intervals, the walls whitewashed yearly. The portraits of reigning Tsar and Tsarina hung on one wall, Menno Simons on the other. 3 rooms each had a clock, 2 of which were also made in a Mennonite shop. This may all sound a bit drab, but you mustn't think that it in any way made us feel poor, and there were those many homey touches everywhere that our mother, a very good housekeeper, would provide. Connected to the house via the summer kitchen at a 90-degree angle were the stables, built large enough to house about 24 horses, 12 cows, some calves and fillies. At one end, a room for the stable boys to sleep and keep their gear in. You may wonder why so many horses. Well, you must know there were no tractors invented as yet, and it took a lot of horsepower to work all the land. Every year, 4 to 6 fillies were born and raised to replace the older horses. Besides the horses, 3 to 5 pairs of oxen were kept in another barn to supplement the horsepower. In later years, my father bought a big motor to run the threshing machine, and the oxen were no longer needed and consequently sold. Up to then, the threshing machine, too, was operated by 10 horses. This, by the way, was the most wearisome work for the poor horses to do. They were hitched in pairs to a contraption that made them go round and round in a 30-foot circle all day. It was certainly a great relief for the horses when this could finally be done by engine power. Yes, those horses, how we loved them, especially the young fillies, seeing them grow up, breaking them into the saddle, then later to the harness. Of so many, I still remember the names and their peculiarities. Each horse had his individuality, same as people. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 4. Our favorite horses.
Since we were on the topic of horses, I thought I would tell you one more story about a horse that my father had bought especially for me when I was 13 years old. He was neither a pony, nor was he a full-grown horse, but rather mid-size. He was of a mouse gray color and had a white star on his forehead. His tail, too, was cut above his knees. This made him rather sporty looking. He had a very good disposition, and we soon became good friends. He knew my step whenever I would come close to his stall, and he would turn his head and ears looking for a tidbit, a handful of oats, or a carrot or something. I could not bring him a piece of sugar, as Mother kept that hidden away. His name was Malchik, which translated would mean little boy. There was, of course, a bridle and a saddle for him, too. He was a very good riding horse, and we had many good times together. One year, the school I was going to had to be closed because of World War I. Most of the teachers were drafted into the army. And rather than to have me be idle, my father engaged a tutor for me to further my education. He was teaching school in the daytime, and so I had to take my lessons after school, which in the wintertime was soon after dark. I used Malchik to take me to and from these lessons. On the way up, already daylight was almost gone, and coming back, it was almost pitch black. I could not even see Malchik's ears, and I had to depend wholly on him to bring me safely home. It was misty, and the dirt road after some heavy rains was muddy. I was not sure whether I was still on the road or somewhere in the fields. Finally, I saw a light blinking in the distance. I held towards it and could soon turn into our yard. The light I had seen was a lantern my mother had hung up in the gable window of the house for me to see and to guide me home. I rode up to the summer kitchen door. One of the maids opened it, and I rode right into the summer kitchen, where I dismounted and led Malchik into his stall. We were both glad to be home again. In later years, Malchik, as most of our horses, was taken by the bandits and probably ridden to death. Love from P Driedger.
Letter 5. The dogs.
I've been telling you about horses in the last 2 letters. Today I would like to tell you about our dogs. And we had many of them when I was a small lad. They were all sizes and colors and breeds. There were the big ones about 2.5 feet high. They were very good watchdogs, and no stranger could enter on the premises without them noticing it and making a big racket. We had about 4 of them. Then there were the mid-sized ones. I remember one especially. He was black with a white collar around his neck and white feet. Through an accident, he had lost his tail, and there was just a little stub left. It looked quite peculiar when he wanted to be friendly and wag his tail, and there was just that little stub wiggling. His name was Sharik, and we children had much fun with him. Then there were the small doggies. They had house privileges, summer and winter. Among these, there was the one that I will never forget. It was a cream-colored female dog, a very friendly and attractive animal. In winter, she slept on a low bench by the oven. She liked to be cuddled and fussed over. Sometimes she had puppies, and were they ever cute? Her name was Damka, which translates as Mademoiselle. It's her tragic death that makes me remember her so well. It was haying time, and Damka was running just ahead of the machine, hunting for partridges, when all of a sudden, the machine caught up with her and cut all 4 of her legs off. I will never forget the look in her brown eyes when she lay there, bleeding and helpless. There was no saving her. She had to be shot. Love, your grandpa.
Letter 6. First day of school, 1907.
With the coming of September, schools will reopen again all over Canada. And for many, it will be their first day of school, a day to which they look forward to with anticipation. This reminds me of my own first day in school. An older friend and cousin of mine, who already had had 2 years of school, had told me some rather frightening stories about the teacher who would wield his strap at every opportunity that the careless pupil would present him with. And often as not, he would strap him anyway, guilty or not, just for the pure joy of it. At least so he was telling me. It was the custom then to start school at 7, but with my birthday only a month away, I was allowed to begin school at 6 years of age. As it turned out during the summer, the teacher had resigned and a new one had been hired. This reduced my fears somewhat, but who could tell what kind of a man the new one would be? In those years, all teachers, with very few exceptions, were men teachers. This teacher turned out to be an elderly, mild-mannered gentleman with gray hair. He wore it brush-cut style, a mustache and short beard and beautiful blue eyes. But I am getting a little ahead of my story. My father must have somehow sensed my fears, for he offered to take me to school in his special one-horse riding buggy. Walking up the narrow pathway to the schoolhouse, he held my hand in his big reassuring one, and that gave me a feeling of trust and confidence that everything would be all right. My father went right to the teacher's room, and there we met the teacher. As already mentioned, he was an elderly gentleman, tall and straight, and a pair of friendly blue eyes looked down on me. My father introduced me, told him my name, another friendly look. His hand reached out and he laid it on my head, tapping my back with the other. All my fears disappeared suddenly. Trustingly, I looked up to him. Until next time, Grandpa.
Letter 7. Early school days.
As promised, we'll continue with the story of my first school day and further. After my introduction to the new teacher in his room, he led me into the classroom where I met my only classmate, Frank Friesen, a very blond, freckle-faced boy, a little older than me. There were only 2 beginners that year, and we soon became good friends. I looked around and saw a big room full of children, all shapes and sizes. There were only a few that I knew, among them my cousin. Everything was new to me. The teacher spoke what seemed to me to be a foreign language. I could speak only Plattdeutsch and Ukrainian. The teacher called the class to order. We all stood and sang a hymn, a chorale. Then the teacher prayed and classes began. The first period was always Bible class, the different grades being at different stages of the Bible. As there was only one teacher for all the grades, his attention had to be divided between all of them. I was very much impressed by all this and watched closely. We beginners were more or less left to ourselves. We each had brought a slate with us and were instructed to draw diagonal lines on it in preparation to our writing lessons later. All German writing was done in the Gothic script, which is somewhat different than today's Latin, sharp, angular lines. We had brought our lunch, and after lunch, we 2 beginners were let out to play and amuse ourselves, while the others continued their studies. At 4 o'clock, school closed, and there was my daddy with his riding buggy to pick me up and take me home. Was I ever glad to see him? It had been a rather long day and full of new impressions, which I was eager to tell him and Mother about. So ended my first day in school, and many more have followed this first one. Looking back on my school days, I must say they were of the happiest in my life. So you too, enjoy them while you can. All too soon, they will be over. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 8. Learning to read.
In my last letter, I wrote you about my first school day. Maybe we should continue with the school topic. Soon after my first school day, we 2 beginners received our first book. It was the German Reader. There was a picture in this book for every letter of the alphabet. The first picture, a porcupine, eagle, I-G-E-L in German, for the letter I. The next one was a nose for the letter N. The third, a clock, Uhr, U-H-R, for the letter U. And the fourth, a full moon, for the letter M. This was the first page, and at the bottom were several words that could be formed with these 4 letters. And so it went throughout the book, page after page, until we were acquainted with all the letters of the alphabet. By the end of the first year, we knew all the letters and could do some light reading. Simultaneously, we had to write the letters and eventually words on our slates. The next year, we received our Russian reader. It too had a picture for every letter of the Russian alphabet. In contrast to the German, the Russian alphabet contained a few more letters than the German. They also were of an entirely different form, the Russians having their alphabet from the Greeks together with their religion, which was Greek Orthodox. And so we learned to read and write in 2 languages. At home we spoke Plattdeutsch and Ukrainian. And I cannot say this put any particular hardships on us. It came fairly easy, much easier than the English in later years. In our 3rd year, we received from the teacher other readers. They contained short stories and recitations. Many of these I can still recite, both in German and Russian. We also received our Bible story book. As already mentioned, the first period each day was Bible study hour. Our teacher was a good storyteller, and this period always ended too soon, or so it seemed to me. History class was also very interesting, and I often caught myself listening when the teacher had history with the upper grades and we were to do some work on our slates. First, it was Russian history, how the great Russian Empire came into being. Then later, ancient history, even more exciting and fascinating. When I entered the senior grades, much of what we were to study I already knew, thanks to my listening earlier on.
Letter 9. Early High School in Schoenfeld.
I think I shall continue with the school topic. After finishing the elementary school, my parents enrolled me in a secondary school. This was a 4-year high school with 4 teachers supervising. One of the teachers, G.P. Schroeder, is still alive and lives in Lodi, California. The school was 10 miles distant, too far to commute back and forth every day, and so I was put up at my uncle and aunt for room and board. On Saturdays, they'd send somebody up to take me home for the weekend. Although I liked school very much, I always looked forward to Saturday when I would be going home. My uncle and aunt kept 7 or 8 student boarders. Besides, they had a large family of their own, and so at mealtime there was always a long table set in the large dining room. My uncle was presiding at the table. He would first read from the Bible and then pray. His prayers were very sincere and left a deep impression with me. My aunt and her maids were kept busy serving all those hungry mouths. The school was within walking distance, and so we did not need to take lunch along. I found this school to differ a lot from my previous school. Here, we had a teacher always with us for every period of the day. No time to be on your own and dream a bit. But I suppose this was for the good of the student. We made good progress, and at the end of the year, after writing the exams, I was promoted to the next grade. That summer of 1914, the First World War broke out, and several of our teachers were drafted into military service. The replacements were young men just out of college and not yet fully qualified. This, of course, was bound to lower the standards of teaching in our school. At Easter time the following year, 2 more teachers were drafted, and as no replacements could be found, the school had to be closed for the duration. And so I found myself to be suddenly at what seemed to be the end of my school days. But the next fall, our dear public school teacher, the same one I started with, offered to give me lessons after school and so help me along in my studies. He had been teaching the lower grade high school in previous years. And so each day, when school was out, I saddled my horse and rode to school to take my lessons. It must have been not so easy for Mr. Isaac, my dear teacher, to take me on after he had just finished a full day's teaching. I am still thankful today for his willingness to do this extra work. We rehearsed what I had learned and then took on some new work. And now I must say goodbye and good night to you all. We shall continue next time around.
Letter 10. Arriving in Ohrlofff, Tiga.
The next fall, 1916, my father, and the advice of Mr. Isaac, our public school teacher, decided to take me to Ohrloff, Tiga, a Mennonite twin village, one of the Machno colonies. It was the place where your Grandma Driedger was born and brought up. Ohrloff, among other things, had a well-established high school, Centralschule, staffed with a very famous and dedicated group of teachers. They were all elderly men exempted from military service, which was important as World War I was still raging on. Ohrloff was 100 miles distant, and it was decided to make the trip by train. So in the first days of September of 1916, the three of us, my father, Mr. Isaac, and I, boarded the train at our home station, Heitjer, at about midnight and arrived in Lichtenau at about 9 a.m. From here it was another 3 miles to Ohrloff. We found a taxi, one drawn by horses, at the station, and for a small charge, the driver agreed to take us to Ohrloff. When we came over the crest of the hill separating the two villages, I saw Ohrloff, which was to become my second home for the first time. The village lay before us, stretched out along a winding river, embedded in a mass of greenery, with only the red-tiled rooftops and high gables protruding. A very beautiful picture, one I fell in love with at first glance. We had to pass over a bridge crossing the river and entered the village about midways. The first building right in front of us was the old church, a 2-story structure surrounded by tall old trees. Right next to it was the school in question. It was a new building just completed before the war started, very modern and impressive, built in a style hitherto not used by Mennonites and unique in all of Machno. We continue next round. Love to all.
Letter 11. Description of Ohrlofff, Tiga.
This twin village, called Tiga Ohrloff with a hyphen, was seen to be a model for other Machno colonies. Originally, they were 2 separate villages, but in the course of time, space between them was filled with buildings of all sorts. Some of the space was taken up by rich landowners who had come here to retire. They had built their villas there. A new hospital was built here, with a staff of dedicated doctors and nurses serving this and neighboring communities. A well-stocked and efficient drugstore was located across the street. A little further down the street was the girls' high school. After public school, boys and girls did not go to the same school. And then a stately 2-story building, a school for the deaf and dumb. It was a large complex with a number of auxiliary buildings. The students here learned not only how to talk, but were taught a trade like woodwork, handicrafts, etc. And the school drew its students from a wide range of communities and was a real blessing for these unfortunates. By the way, this school is the only building left standing after World War II. Then the village store and a few smaller shops, books, and variety store, not to be forgotten. The church and boys' high school I already mentioned in my previous letter. The village also had its own generating station, For me, it was always a treat to pay this station a visit. 2 large diesel engines were supplying the power to run the 2 generators that were generating the electricity. Most of the homes had electric lights, and a number of farmers used electricity to run their threshing machines. Don't forget, this is a time when most of rural Russia lived with candlelight or kerosene lamps at best. The village also had an artesian well. The water from this well was piped into homes and barns and was available at the turn of a tap, and it was good tasting water. Each place had a sizable orchard on its lot with a large variety of fruit trees. And behind the orchard was the bush lot. Each farmer had his plot, and so the bush stretched from one end of the village to the other in a continuous line. This was the place I was to stay for several years and go to school. Later, all the family moved here as well and stayed for another 5 years. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 12. More on high school in Ohrloff, Tiga.
Now back to my story. Remember, we had just arrived in Ohrloff after a long train ride. Once in Ohrloff, I was presented to the teachers, and after passing my entrance exams, I was admitted to the school. This was strictly a boys' school. The girls had their school a little ways down the street. The curriculum of the schools differed somewhat. Separate schools for boys and girls after public school was the order in all Russian schools, but no rule without exceptions. During the first winter, World War I was still raging on and coal was in short supply. The boards of the 2 schools decided, in order to save precious fuel, to move the 2 schools into one building, but to still hold classes separate, the girls in the forenoon and the boys in the afternoon, the change to be made during the lunch hour. So soon after 12 o'clock, the boys started gathering in the corridors to be present when the girls would leave their classrooms. This then gave them opportunity to see each other at close range and exchange smiles. Later, when we occupied the same seats, notes were found and again left when school was out. Some quite amusing and sometimes romantic incidents developed out of this arrangement. But now back to my story. A boarding place had to be found, as I was not expected to come home before Christmas. Such a place was found with an elderly couple. They already had taken on 2 boys, and I was now the 3rd. Their daughter, her husband in military service, stayed with them, helping with meals and general housework. This done, Father took me to the variety store and bought me a new watch. It cost 15 rubles. I was quite pleased. The next morning, Father and Mr. Isaac left for home, leaving me behind for the first time, for so long a time, amid strange people. I was not yet 15 then. Until next time, Grandpa.
Letter 13. Schoolmates and teachers.
It was not too long before I made friends among my classmates. There was one especially that I was attracted to. His name was Victor Emmanuel Pitskow, a strong, broad-shouldered fellow. He was the son of a large landowner in the Crimea, a beautiful peninsula between the Black and the Azov Sea. By choosing him for a friend, I made sure that I'd not be molested by any of the school's rowdies. Victor and I occupied the same double desk in class, and our friendship lasted until the end of my school days. Our teachers were all elderly men, way past military service age, which was good, as we were still in the midst of World War I, and so there would be no chance of them being drafted into the army. Many schools had to be closed because of the teacher shortage. I think of my teachers rather fondly. They were all good and very dedicated men, and I owe them a lot. I made good progress in school and soon felt quite at home in my new surroundings. Not that I didn't feel a bit homesick at times, but this was offset to a large extent by lively letter exchange from home. In the off-school hours, there were other activities. Ohrloff had a large forest. It was well managed and a path wound through it from end to end. It was very beautiful there in the fall and spring, and we students spent many happy hours in it. At the far end of the forest was the well-kept cemetery with an olive tree hedge around it, evergreens and bushes between the graves and tombstones. One especially sticks in my head, the high-rising column of Johann Cornys, the famous organizer and co-founder of the Machno colonies. He had died at a fairly young age and had accomplished such a great deal. To signify that his work was not completed, his column looked as if it had been broken off at the top. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 14. The demise of Ohrlofff.
Yes, my years in Ohrloff bring back many fond memories of those carefree days of my youth. Of the many friends, only a few are left that I am still in closer contact with. Most of them are no longer with us. They have completed their journey here on earth. It's interesting now to trace back their lives and to see how those different characters developed and how they ended up. Many of the dreams and ambitions of our youth never realized. War and the revolution put our lives on a different course than we had ever thought possible. The storm of the revolution put everything upside down. The people that we loved were scattered in all directions over the globe of the earth. The beautiful village of Ohrloff is no more. The village that our forefathers built and cherished, the churches, the schools, hospitals, orchards, forests, everything gone, and what there is now in its place is of no comparison to the original. My last school year fell in the year 1918. It marked the end of World War I. It also marked the year of the German occupation of the Ukraine. Although Germany was Russia's adversary in the war, its occupation of Ukraine proved very beneficial to us, as it freed us from the Bolshevik terror for a period of about 7 months. Prior to their coming, in February and March, the Mennonite colonies endured a time of utter lawlessness, of plunder and murder, hitherto not seen in the colonies. I left school and went home to my parents for about 6 weeks. When the German army set up law and order again, I returned in order to make my exams and graduate. My class had already finished and left, but the teachers made an exception. They let me prepare for my exams. I had 2 short weeks in which to catch up in law studies and then was admitted to do the exams. I made it with honors, and after a wonderful May Day celebration with the rest of the school, I returned home again. Love, P Driedger.
Letter 15. The Green Harvest.
1918 proved to be the last year that we were left more or less unmolested. The German army had restored law and order, and everybody could again pursue his or her occupation or profession. When I came home from Ohrloff, a good crop of wheat and other grains was in the making, and soon it would be ready for harvest. I liked the harvest time, my job being riding one of the binders, a machine that cut the grain and then bound it into sheaves, which then in turn would be set up in stooks. Many hands were necessary to do this manual work. I liked machines as long as I can remember, and so I looked forward to the time of harvest. I can still smell the newly cut fields and the sweat of the hard-working people. Those were long days, from dawn to dusk almost, in the open fields. Lunch and vesper were brought out at designated times. Oh, how good it felt to rest a bit and enjoy the food. Apples and pears from the orchard for dessert. It took weeks till all the grain was cut. Then threshing time came along. The threshing machine and the big motor had to be put into shape. That too took some time. It was me and my father that were engaged in this work mostly. Finally, everything was ready and threshing could begin. Here, too, many people had to be employed. The threshing machine separated the sheaves into 3 parts: the grain, the straw, and the chaff. 3 strong men had to carry the grain bags into the granary. The chaff, it was used for food for the cattle and horses. This had to be gathered into big blankets and then carried high into the barn. Women had to do this laborious work. It was pitiful. Then there was the straw to be taken care of. It was gathered in big nets and drawn to and up the big straw stacks. Many people had to do this hard work. How much simpler it is today when one man can do the whole operation with a combine. Maybe that's the reason for the many unemployed. Love, P Driedger.
Letter 16. The Arrival of Machno.
By now, 1918 was drawing to its end, and in November of the year, the Great War also came to its end. Germany, totally exhausted, had lost the war, and the Allies were getting ready to divide up the spoils. The German occupation forces had to leave the Ukraine now, leaving us to the free will of the marauding bandits. Among the many bandit leaders was especially one that became quite infamous by the gruesome deeds left in his path. His name was Machno, or Bachko Machno as his followers called him. Now, with the German army withdrawn, they came right into the open and robbed and killed at random. During the previous summer, some of us had to stay awake through the nights to watch for approaching danger. But now, with the Germans gone, the nights were fairly safe. The bandits had nothing to fear and did their work in the daytime. The winter of 1918 to 19 was the longest I can remember, expecting daily to be robbed, beaten, or killed. We did not go anywhere, but stayed close to or in the house at all times. To shorten the time and to occupy ourselves, we started to make toys. Christmas was at hand, and so we began to make our own gifts. Our father, a gifted drawer, put designs of different animals on sheets of plywood, and we boys cut them out with our fret saws. Then the pieces were sanded and polished, glued together, and painted in different colors. Our prize piece was a beautiful carriage, painted in black with yellow stripes and red wheels, drawn by 2 white horses in shining harness. In this way, many hours were spent that helped us forget, for a little while, the hopeless and dangerous situation we were in.
Letter 17, Calming the Terrorists.
The winter of 1918 to 19, as I've already mentioned previously, was the longest and hardest to bear that I can remember, with almost daily visits from the marauding bandits. Often we came very close to being murdered. Each time, through some insignificant circumstance, we were saved. We knew it was God's grace and leading. One day, 4 heavily armed men burst into the house and demanded a good meal. Mother and her maids hurried off into the kitchen to prepare what they had ordered. My father and I were left in the room with the 4 bandits. Their dark eyes and facial expressions did not foretell anything good. Later, we learned from friends that they had come to kill our father. An organ was in the room. When they noticed it, they wanted music. I, being the only one who could play, sat down and started playing. Hymns, dances, whatever came to my mind. More, more, they cried, whenever I hesitated. And wonder of wonders, their faces cleared up. They started talking, and the whole dismal atmosphere became friendlier. Meanwhile, a delicious meal was prepared and brought in. The 4 of them sat down to eat, while I was encouraged to keep on playing. And the more they ate and the more I played, the more they changed to ordinary, likable people. When they were finally finished, they got up from the table, thanked us for the meal and the music, and went out to drive away. We looked at each other in amazement and thanked our God for delivering us from something that could have ended in some violent debacle. This time we were saved. But hardly a day went by that we did not hear of some gruesome murders and violence. A time of no law, no government, and no authority to turn to. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 18, A Brief Reprieve.
In April of 1919, the so-called White Army, under the command of General Denikin, finally made its appearance from the south and freed us from the yoke of the Reds and the bandits. Some of the bandits, however, that weren't caught, went into hiding and continued their work from there, mostly at nights. Many a night my father and I sat up watching and listening to every sound. We were spared those nightly visits, but many of our neighbors were robbed, beaten, and some murdered. The newly installed police could not handle the many cases and was too weak. When spring came, we tried to put as much crop in as we could, with the few horses and implements they had left us, and with what seed we had. A good part of our land was given to the surrounding peasants, and was seeded by them before the White Army came. We were supposed to have it back again, but we didn't care too much either, as nobody was sure as to whether or not the whites would be able to secure their hold on the country. And if they didn't, it would be much better and wiser if we would leave things as they were and not aggravate the people. We had a fair crop that summer and were able to take it off and store it in our barns with the help of hired help. As the summer drew to a close and the unrest and robberies wouldn't diminish, our parents made up their minds not to spend another winter in this bandit-infested region, but to rather move into one of the Mennonite villages, where was more protection and where it was much safer. Father was successful in securing a Russian family to move into part of our house and to sharecrop the land and livestock. He was a good man that had worked for us for several years already. It was not easy for our parents to leave everything and go. Much love from P Driedger.
Letter 19. Fleeing the Driedger estate.
And so in the second half of September of 1919, we as a family left the place of my birth and happy childhood, never to return, never to see it again. Up on the hill, I turned around to have a last look at the house, surrounded by shade trees and a large orchard, and the many other buildings lying so peacefully in the valley. When my grandfather, Abraham Driedger, had come there in the 1870s, there was no bush, no trees, no house, nothing but emptiness. Through hard work and good management by him and later my father, this beautiful estate was created. I never saw it again. But in my memory, it is as clear as the day we left it. As we heard many years later, buildings all had been taken down, piece by piece, windows, doors, all the lumber, all the bricks. All the buildings were built of brick that had been made in our own brickyard. Everything was carted away by our Russian neighbors of the surrounding villages. The trees were cut down, the garden uprooted, and in not too many years, one can imagine, everything looked much the same as when my grandfather bought the land. Empty. It took us about 2 days before we reached our new destination, the colony of Ohrloff. The place my father had rented seemed rather small after the large and roomy accommodations we had left behind. We brought 4 horses, 4 cows, some pigs and chickens, beside all the house articles. The owner, who had reserved for himself a couple of rooms and also some barn and stable room, stood wide-eyed at the gate when we pulled in with all our stuff. We filled the house and barn to bursting, and I think he was deadly afraid that we might crowd him out altogether. So it wasn't too long before relations between us began to deteriorate, and we began looking for something more suitable. But to find something was easier said than done. Due to so many refugees leaving their homes and looking for accommodations in the villages, housing was at a premium. Then at that point, a terrible happening came to our rescue, of which I'll tell you next time around. Much love to you all from Grandpa.
This concludes part 1 of Letters to My Grandchildren.